Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the advanced xenobiology classroom, trying not to stand out. At 22 years old, he was one of only 3 humans at Kepler Prime University, the most famous school in the galaxy. The other 2 humans were studying engineering on different floors, which meant Jake was completely alone in his biology classes. The classroom looked nothing like the ones back on Earth. The seats were arranged in a perfect circle around a glowing holographic display. In the center, each seat was different, designed for the various alien species that attended the university. Jake's chair was simple and Earth-like, but the seat next to him was filled with what looked like living crystal. That was Zixara, a Velinari student, who communicated through patterns of colored light that danced across her crystalline body. Right now, soft blue lights were moving through her form, which Jake had learned meant she was paying attention. When she was excited, the lights turned bright yellow and moved faster. On Jake's other side sat Thorgan, a Cromnite whose skin looked like gray stone. Despite being nearly 8 feet tall and weighing as much as a small car, Thorgan was one of the gentlest beings Jake had ever met. The big alien was always careful not to bump into smaller students, and spoke in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Across the circle, Pipla the Churi was taking notes on a device that looked like a tiny computer. She was only 3 feet tall, with 6 arms and large compound eyes that could see in directions Jake couldn't even imagine. Whenever she looked at Jake, which was often, her antennae would twitch in what he hoped was curiosity rather than fear. Professor Veltar stood in the center of the circle, her tall, thin body swaying slightly as she spoke. She had 6 eyes arranged around her head, and Jake never knew which one to look at when she was talking. Her voice was musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Today we continue our study of apex predators from across the galaxy, Professor Veltar said, her voice carrying easily through the room. These creatures represent the pinnacle of evolutionary hunting success on their respective worlds. Jake listened as she described various predators from different planets. There was the shadow crawler from Nexus 7, a creature that could bend light around itself to become invisible. The ice worm from Frost Prime could freeze its prey solid with its breath. The thorn stalker from Verdun 3 had poison spines that could kill most life forms in seconds. As the professor spoke, Jake noticed something interesting about his classmates. They listened to these descriptions with the same calm attention they gave to any other lecture topic. Zixara's lights stayed a steady blue. Thorgan nodded thoughtfully. Pipla took careful notes. None of them seemed worried or frightened by the discussion of deadly predators. Jake found this strange. Back on Earth, even talking about dangerous animals like lions or bears made people nervous. Everyone knew someone who had a story about encountering a wild animal, even if it was just an aggressive dog or an angry goose. But these alien students discussed galaxy-spanning predators like they were talking about the weather. The common factor among all advanced civilizations, Professor Veltar continued, is that they evolved from species with minimal predation pressure. The Velinari, like our student Zixara, evolved from creatures that absorbed sunlight and minerals. The Cromnites, like Thorgan, developed from peaceful stone-eating organisms. The Churi, like Pipla, evolved from cooperative hive builders. Jake shifted in his seat. He knew where this was going, and he didn't like it. Most successful civilizations, the professor said, evolved from herbivores, scavengers, or other peaceful species. This is why we developed cooperation, technology, and complex societies. Species that evolved from predators or prey animals rarely develop advanced civilizations. Several students glanced at Jake. He felt his face get warm. Everyone knew that humans came from Earth, and Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world. Most of the students at the university came from Class 1 or Class 2 worlds, where the biggest dangers were bad weather or maybe a few poisonous plants. There are, Of course, exceptions, Professor Veltar said. And Jake was sure she was looking at him with at least 3 of her eyes. Some species from dangerous worlds do develop space travel and join galactic society. However, these Deathworlder species often struggle to integrate peacefully with more civilized races. Jake clenched his hands in his lap. He had worked harder than anyone to get into this university. His grades were perfect, his test scores were in the top 1%, and he had learned 4 different alien languages. But every day, he felt like he had to prove that humans weren't violent monsters. The worst part was that he understood why the other species were nervous around humans. Earth was a nightmare planet by galactic standards. It had active volcanoes, massive storms, deadly diseases, and thousands of species that could kill a human in various horrible ways. Humans had evolved to survive in that environment, which meant they had developed traits that seemed terrifying to species from peaceful worlds. Humans could run for hours without stopping. They could throw objects with deadly accuracy. They could track other creatures across vast distances. They could function despite being injured, sick, or exhausted. Most importantly, they could remain calm and think clearly while facing death. To species that had never faced a real predator, humans seemed like unstoppable killing machines. For tomorrow's class, Professor Veltar announced, we will have a special demonstration. The university has acquired a live specimen of a Corvin stalker, one of the most dangerous predators in the Outer Rim systems. Excited murmurs filled the classroom. Zixaris lights flashed bright yellow. Thorgan leaned forward with interest. Pipla's antennae twitched rapidly. The creature will be contained in a Class 5 energy field, the professor continued. This will allow us to observe its behavior and hunting instincts safely. It will be completely unable to harm anyone. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had read about Corvin stalkers in his research. They were 8 feet tall, incredibly fast, and could partially phase through solid matter. They were intelligent hunters that could adapt their tactics based on their prey's behavior. On their homeworld, they were the undisputed apex predator. Ah, you worried about tomorrow? Pipla asked Jake as the class ended. Her voice was high and musical, like the sound of small bells. Should I be? Jake replied, gathering his books. Oh no, she said quickly, her antennae drooping with embarrassment. I didn't mean to suggest that you should be afraid. I was just curious about how your species responds to potential threats. Jake looked at her for a moment. Pipla was genuinely curious, not trying to be mean. Most of his classmates were the same way. They found humans fascinating in the same way that humans might find a rare animal interesting. Humans don't usually worry about things that are properly contained, Jake sighed carefully. We trust good security systems. That's very logical, Thorgan said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Fear of properly contained threats would be inefficient. Jake nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In his experience, the most dangerous situations were the ones where everyone assumed everything was under control. As he walked back to his dormitory, Jake thought about the differences between his species and his classmates. They saw the universe as a generally safe place where bad things happened rarely and could usually be prevented with proper planning. Humans saw the universe as a dangerous place where bad things happened regularly and you had to be ready for anything. Tomorrow, Jake hoped the universe would prove his classmates right and him wrong. But deep in his bones, he felt the old human instinct that had kept his species alive for millions of years. Something was going to go wrong, and when it did, he would be the only one ready for it. The next morning, Jake arrived at the main lecture hall to find it packed with students. Word had spread about the live predator demonstration, and aliens from all over the university had come to see the famous Corvin stalker. The circular seating area had been expanded to hold nearly 200 students, all chattering excitedly in dozens of different languages. Jake took his usual seat next to Zixara and Thorgan. The Velinari's crystal body was flashing rapid patterns of yellow and orange light, showing her excitement. Thorgan was leaning forward as much as his massive frame would allow, his stone-like face showing unusual animation. "I have read 17 research papers about Corvin stalkers," Pipla said, settling into her seat with her 6 arms full of note-taking devices. "But I have never seen one in person. This is very exciting." "The containment technology is fascinating," added a student. Jake didn't recognize a tall blue being with tentacles instead of arms. A Class 5 energy field can hold anything short of a small starship. Jake looked around the room and noticed something that made him uncomfortable. All the alien students were treating this like an exciting field trip. They were relaxed, happy, and completely confident in their safety. None of them showed any signs of concern or caution. Professor Veltar entered the hall, accompanied by 2 university security officers and a team of technicians. They were wheeling in a large cylindrical container that hummed with energy. The container was about 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide, made of some kind of transparent metal that shimmered with rainbow colors. "Students, please settle down," Professor Veltar called out, her musical voice carrying easily through the large room. "Today you will witness one of nature's most perfect killing machines in a completely safe environment." The technicians began setting up their equipment while the security officers took positions around the room. Jake noticed that the guards looked relaxed too. They were there as a precaution, but they clearly didn't expect any real danger. "The Corvin stalker you are about to see," the professor continued, "was captured on the rim world of Corvus Prime. It is an adult male, approximately 8 feet in height and weighing roughly 400 pounds. It possesses all the typical abilities of its species, including partial matter phasing, enhanced speed, and remarkable intelligence." One of the technicians nodded to the professor. She pressed a control on her teaching podium, and the container began to change. The solid walls became transparent, revealing the creature inside. Jake had seen pictures of Corvin stalkers, but seeing one in person was completely different. The creature was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Its body was covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Its head was elongated, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth that looked like they could bite through steel. Its arms ended in claws that were each as long as Jake's fingers. But what struck Jake most was the creature's eyes. They were large, intelligent, and constantly moving. The stalker was studying its surroundings, looking at each student, examining the technology that held it prisoner. "Observe how the creature moves," Professor Veltar said. "Notice the efficiency of its motions, the way it conserves energy while remaining ready to strike at any moment." The alien students watched with fascination as the stalker paced around its cage. They took notes, made recordings, and discussed the creature's anatomy in quiet, academic tones. To them, it was a living textbook, a perfect example of evolutionary adaptation. Jake saw something different. He watched the way the creature tested the walls of its prison, pushing against them at different points, looking for weaknesses. He noticed how it cataloged every person in the room, spending extra time studying the exits and the security equipment. Most importantly, he saw the intelligence behind those alien eyes, the calculating mind of a predator that was far from defeated. "The containment field operates on a rotating frequency algorithm," one of the technicians explained to a group of engineering students. "It cycles through different energy patterns every few seconds, making it impossible for the creature to adapt to any single frequency." Jake frowned. The technician was explaining the security system in front of the creature they were trying to contain. Even if the stalker couldn't understand the words, it was clearly listening to the sounds and watching the reactions of the people around it. "Now, let us observe the creature's hunting behavior," Professor Veltar said. She nodded to another technician who activated a small device. Suddenly, A holographic projection of a small animal appeared inside the cage with the stalker. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The stalker moved faster than Jake's eyes could follow, crossing the cage in what seemed like an instant. Its claws passed harmlessly through the hologram, but the display of speed and power made several students gasp. "Remarkable," breathed Thorgan. "I have never seen anything move so quickly." "The acceleration must create enormous physical stress," Pipla added, her antennae twitching with excitement. "How does its body handle such forces?" Jake wasn't paying attention to his classmates' academic discussions. He was watching the stalker, and what he saw made his stomach clench with worry. The creature had realized that the prey animal wasn't real, but instead of becoming frustrated or confused, it had immediately begun studying the holographic projector. It was learning about the technology being used against it. "Let's try a different stimulus," Professor Veltar said. She activated another control, and the hologram changed to show a different type of prey animal, one from the stalker's home world. Again, the creature attacked with lightning speed, and again, its claws passed through empty air. But this time, Jake noticed something else. For just a moment, as the stalker struck, it seemed to flicker, becoming slightly transparent. Did anyone else see that? Jake asked quietly, "See what?" Zixara replied, her lights pulsing with curiosity. The creature became see-through for a second. "Oh yes," said a student sitting behind them, "an insect-like being with compound eyes. That's the partial matter phasing ability. It's perfectly normal for the species." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How often can they do that? The research indicates they can phase for approximately 2 to 3 seconds at a time. Piple answered, consulting one of her devices. But they need to rest for at least 30 seconds between uses to avoid cellular damage. Jake did quick math in his head. If the creature could phase through solid matter for 2 or 3 seconds every 30 seconds, that gave it regular opportunities to test the containment field. And if it was as intelligent as it appeared to be, it might figure out the fields. "Timing, Professor," Jake called out, raising his hand. "How does the containment field handle matter phasing?" Professor Veltar turned her attention to him, several of her eyes focusing on his face. "An excellent question, Jake. The Class 5 field operates on multiple dimensional frequencies. Even if a creature can phase through normal matter, it cannot phase through the energy matrix." Jake nodded, but his worry didn't go away. In his experience, any security system that was considered impossible to escape was usually the first one to fail. As if responding to his thoughts, the lights in the lecture hall flickered. It was just for a moment, barely noticeable, but Jake saw the stalker's head snap up immediately. The creature had noticed the power fluctuation too. "Just a minor power grid adjustment," one of the technicians said into his communication device. "Nothing to worry about." But Jake was worrying. He looked around the room and realized that he was probably the only person there who understood how dangerous their situation really was. Everyone else saw a perfectly contained predator in an unbreakable cage. Jake saw intelligent killer that was actively looking for a way out, and a security system that depended on technology that had already shown signs of instability. The creature began pacing again, but now its movements were different. It was no longer just exploring its cage randomly. It was testing specific points, timing its movements, preparing for something. Jake's hands began to sweat and his heart rate increased. Every human instinct he had was screaming that danger was coming. But when he looked around the room, he saw 200 relaxed, happy alien students who had no idea what evolution had taught Jake's species about the moment when everything goes wrong. The stalker stopped pacing and turned to look directly at Jake. For a long moment, predator and human stared at each other across the room. Then the creature's mouth opened slightly, showing those razor-sharp teeth in what might have been a smile. That was when the lights flickered again. Longer this time, and Jake heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the high-pitched whine of electronics struggling to maintain power, coming from the direction of the containment field. The whining sound from the containment field grew louder. Jake watched as the rainbow shimmer around the stalker's cage began to flicker like a broken light bulb. The technicians noticed it too and began frantically checking their equipment. "Minor power fluctuation," one of them said, his voice trying to sound calm. "The backup systems will engage automatically." But Jake could see the worry in the technician's movements. His hands were shaking as he worked on his control panel. The stalker had noticed the technician's fear too. The creature moved closer to the front of its cage, watching the aliens work with those intelligent, calculating eyes. "Perhaps we should postpone the demonstration," Jake said loudly, standing up from his seat. Professor Veltar looked at him with surprise. "There's no need for concern, Jake. The containment field has multiple backup systems. Even if the primary field fails, there are 2 more layers of protection." "But what if they all fail at the same time?" Jake asked. The professor made a sound that might have been laughter. "That's impossible. The chances of a complete system failure are less than 1 in 10 million. Jake wanted to explain that, in his experience, impossible things happened all the time, especially when everyone was sure they couldn't happen. But before he could speak, the containment field made a loud crackling sound. The stalker immediately moved to the wall of its cage and placed one clawed hand against the energy barrier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature began to phase, its hand becoming transparent and starting to push through the flickering field. "It's testing the field strength," Jake shouted. But his voice was lost in the sudden noise of alarms and panicking students. The stalker pulled its hand back and began pacing in a tight circle. Jake realized the creature was timing the power fluctuations, waiting for the right moment to make its move. "Everyone remain calm," Professor Veltar announced, her musical voice now tight with stress. "Security is on the way." But Jake knew security wouldn't arrive in time. He could see it in the stalker's posture, in the way it had positioned itself near the weakest part of the containment field. The creature had found its opportunity, and it was about to take it. The lights in the lecture hall went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that moment of darkness, Jake heard a sound like breaking glass mixed with the hum of failing electronics. When the emergency lights came on, the stalker was gone. For a heartbeat, the entire lecture hall was silent. Then someone screamed, and chaos erupted. 200 alien students began panicking all at once. Zixara's crystal body flashed bright white with terror. Thorgan, despite being 8 feet tall and incredibly strong, curled up into a ball on the floor. Pipla tried to hide under her seat, all 6 of her arms shaking. Other students ran for the exits, pushing and stumbling over each other. Some froze in place, unable to move from fear. The few security officers in the room were shouting into their communication devices, calling for backup. Jake stood perfectly still in the middle of the chaos, his eyes searching the shadows of the lecture hall. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear and focused. This was the moment his species had evolved for, the situation that had shaped human development for millions of years. He spotted the stalker hiding behind a group of overturned desks near the main exit. The creature was perfectly positioned to attack the fleeing students, but it seemed confused by their behavior. It was used to prey that ran in predictable patterns, not the chaotic scrambling of terrified aliens who had never faced a real predator. Stalker's head turned, scanning the room, and its eyes locked onto Jake. Here was something different. Here was a creature that wasn't running or hiding or panicking. Here was something standing still, alert, and ready to fight. Jake felt his body responding to the threat in ways his alien classmates couldn't understand. His pupils dilated, letting in more light. His breathing deepened, feeding more oxygen to his muscles. His hands steadied, and his vision sharpened until he could see every detail of the creature's movement. The stalker took a step toward him, then another. It moved like liquid shadow, every motion perfectly controlled and silent. Jake could see the intelligence in its eyes, the predator's calculation as it sized up this strange new type of prey. "Everyone get behind me," Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly through the panic. Move slowly toward the back of the room. Some of the closer students heard him and began moving. Zixara's lights had dimmed to almost nothing, but she managed to float toward Jake. Thorgan uncurled himself and began herding other students away from the stalker. The creature noticed the movement and tensed, preparing to spring. Jake knew he had seconds before it attacked. He grabbed a metal rod from a nearby equipment stand, weighing it in his hands. It was about 3 feet long and felt solid enough to use as a weapon. More importantly, it gave him reach that his fists wouldn't have. "That's right," Jake said quietly, speaking directly to the stalker. "Look at me. I'm the threat here." The creature tilted its head, studying him. It had probably never encountered a prey animal that spoke to it calmly while holding a weapon. Jake began moving sideways, keeping himself between the stalker and the students. He made himself bigger by spreading his arms and standing up straighter. He maintained eye contact with the creature, something that most prey animals would never do. The stalker followed his movement, staying focused on him instead of the escaping students. Good. Jake was successfully drawing its attention. "You're confused, aren't you?" Jake said, continuing to move in a slow circle. "Your instincts are telling you to chase the running prey, but your intelligence is telling you I'm the real danger." The creature made a low growling sound and took another step forward. Jake could see the muscles in its legs bunching up, preparing to leap. When the attack came, it was faster than anything Jake had ever seen. The stalker crossed 15 feet in what seemed like an instant, claws extended and mouth open wide. But Jake had been watching the creature's body language, reading the tiny signs that preceded the attack. He threw himself sideways just as the stalker leaped. Rolling behind an overturned table, the creature landed where he'd been standing and immediately spun around, looking for him. Its movements were fluid and quick, but Jake noticed something important. The stalker was favoring its left side slightly, putting more weight on its right leg. It had an old injury, probably from a fight with another predator on its home world. Jake came up from behind the table and swung his metal rod at the creature's injured side. The stalker twisted away, but not quite fast enough. The rod caught it on the shoulder, making it stumble backward. The creature roared, a sound like tearing metal that made several students cry out in fear. But Jake felt a surge of hope. He had heard it, which meant it could be hurt. And if it could be hurt, it could be beaten. The stalker circled him, more cautious now. It had learned that this strange prey could fight back effectively. Jake kept the metal rod ready and continued moving, never letting the creature get behind him. "Come on," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Let's finish this." The creature attacked again, this time trying to fake him out by feinting left before going right. But Jake had grown up playing sports that required split-second reactions and hand-eye coordination. He read the fake and was ready when the real attack came. He swung the rod in a wide arc, catching the stalker across the chest as it lunged for him. The impact knocked the creature sideways, sending it crashing into a row of seats. Jake didn't wait for it to recover. He ran forward and brought the rod down hard on the creature's injured shoulder. The stalker shrieked and rolled away, but Jake could see that it was moving more slowly now. The creature backed toward a corner of the room, its eyes never leaving Jake's face. It was hurt, confused, and for the first time in its life, it was facing prey that fought back with intelligence and skill. Jake realized he had a choice. He could probably kill the creature now while it was injured and trapped. But that wasn't what he wanted. The stalker was a magnificent predator, perfectly adapted to its environment. It wasn't evil, just following its nature. Instead, Jake began herding it toward a section of the room where he had spotted an emergency containment panel. If he could activate it, he might be able to trap the creature without killing it. The stalker seemed to sense his intention and made one last desperate attack, phasing partially through the air as it leaped toward him. But Jake was ready. He dropped to one knee and thrust the metal rod upward, catching the creature in the stomach as it materialized above him. The impact sent the stalker flying backward into the corner. Jake lunged for the containment panel and slammed his hand down on the activation button. A new energy field sprang to life, trapping the injured creature in the corner of the room. The stalker threw itself against the barrier once, then seemed to realize it was truly beaten. It settled down in the corner, watching Jake with what might have been respect. Jake stood there breathing hard, the metal rod still in his hands, as security officers finally burst into the lecture hall. The emergency was over, but he knew that everything had changed. The security officers stopped in the doorway of the lecture hall, staring at the scene before them. They had expected to find a dangerous predator loose among helpless students. Instead, they found Jake standing calmly next to an emergency containment field that held the stalker securely in the corner. "How did you manage this?" asked the lead security officer, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. His voice carried a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "I just kept it busy until I could activate the containment system," Jake replied, setting down his metal rod. His hands were shaking slightly now that the danger was over, but his voice remained steady. Professor Veltar approached slowly, all 6 of her eyes focused on Jake. "You fought a Corvan stalker with a piece of laboratory equipment and won?" "I didn't really fight it," Jake said. "I just convinced it to go where I wanted it to go." Around the lecture hall, students were slowly coming out of their hiding places. Many of them were staring at Jake like he was something impossible. Zixara floated over to him, her crystal body pulsing with soft green light that Jake had learned meant confusion mixed with gratitude. "How did you stay so calm?" she asked, her light patterns flickering rapidly. "When the creature escaped, I could not think clearly. My mind became filled with panic signals. My species evolved differently," Jake explained, sitting down heavily in a nearby chair. The adrenaline was leaving his system, and he suddenly felt very tired. "When humans face danger, our bodies produce chemicals that help us think faster and move quicker instead of shutting down." Thorgan approached carefully, his massive stone-like form moving with unusual uncertainty. "I have read about fight-or-flight responses in theoretical papers," he said in his quiet, rumbling voice. "But I never understood what they meant until now. You chose to fight when everything in my nature told me to hide." "It wasn't really a choice," Jake said. "My body just reacted. When I saw the stalker heading toward the other students, I had to do something." Pipla emerged from under her overturned desk, all 6 of her arms clutching her note-taking devices. Her compound eyes were wide as she looked at Jake. "You moved in patterns I have never seen before," she said. "You seemed to know where the creature would attack before it moved." "I was watching its body language," Jake explained. "Predators usually signal their intentions with small movements. If you know what to look for, you can predict what they'll do next." "But how did you know what to look for?" asked another student, a small furry creature from the science cluster worlds. "Corvan stalkers are not from your world." Jake thought about this for a moment. "All predators have similar behaviors," he said finally. "They test their opponents, look for weaknesses, try to position themselves for the best attack. Once you understand the basic pattern, you can apply it to different species." Professor Veltar was taking notes on a small device, her expression fascinated. "This is remarkable," she said. You're describing complex behavioral analysis that you performed instinctively during a life-threatening situation. Most species would be unable to think clearly under such stress. Most humans could have done the same thing, Jake said. We're all trained from childhood to handle emergency situations. Every human learns basic first aid, fire safety, and personal protection. It's just part of growing up on Earth. The security officers had finished securing the stalker and were preparing to transport it to a more secure facility. As they worked, one of them approached Jake. "We've reviewed the security recordings," the officer said. "What you did was extraordinary. You protected nearly 200 students with nothing but improvised weapons and quick thinking." "I just did what anyone would do," Jake replied. "No," said a voice from the doorway. "You did what only a human would do." Everyone turned to see Dean Carricks entering the lecture hall. The dean was one of the most respected beings in the galaxy, an ancient creature whose species had been exploring space for thousands of years. His presence meant that word of the incident had already reached the highest levels of the university. "Dean Carricks," Professor Veltar said, bowing slightly. "I take full responsibility for the containment failure. The security protocols were followed, but the system malfunctioned. The technical failure is not why I'm here," the dean replied, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I came to see the human who faced down a Corvan stalker to protect his classmates." Jake stood up as the dean approached. He had never been this close to such an important figure, and he felt nervous in a completely different way than he had when facing the predator. "Tell me, Jake Morrison," the dean said, "what went through your mind when the creature escaped?" "I thought about getting everyone to safety," Jake answered honestly. "The stalker was between the students and the exits, so someone had to keep it distracted." "And you didn't consider running yourself?" Jake paused, thinking about the question. "The idea occurred to me," he said, "but it didn't feel like a real option. There were people who needed help." The dean nodded slowly. "This is exactly what we hope to learn by inviting humans to study here," he said. "Your species brings perspectives that we lack." "I don't understand," Jake said. "For millions of years," the dean explained, "the civilized species of the galaxy have lived in peace and safety. We have eliminated predators from our worlds, created perfect security systems, and built societies where violence is almost unknown. This has made us wise and cooperative, but it has also made us helpless when real danger appears." He gestured toward the corner where the stalker had been contained. "When that creature escaped, every being in this room except you responded according to our evolutionary programming. We hid, we fled, or we froze in terror. You responded according to your programming, which told you to assess the threat, protect your group, and fight if necessary. Humans aren't naturally violent," Jake said quickly. "We just evolved on a world where we had to deal with dangerous situations." "Exactly," the dean said. "Violence and the ability to handle violence are two different things. Your species learned to be capable of fighting without becoming monsters. This is a very rare combination in the galaxy." Zixura's lights pulsed with sudden understanding. "This is why the university wanted human students," she said. "Not just for academic diversity, but for practical diversity." "The galaxy is becoming more dangerous," the dean confirmed. "As we explore further into unknown space, we encounter threats that our peaceful civilizations are not equipped to handle. We need partners who can think clearly under pressure and act decisively when others cannot." Jake looked around at his classmates, seeing them in a new light. "You're all incredibly intelligent," he said. "Much smarter than humans in most ways. You've created technologies and societies that we can barely understand." "Intelligence takes many forms," Professor Veltar said. "Academic intelligence, social intelligence, creative intelligence, and what you demonstrated today, survival intelligence. Each has its place. Thorgan spoke up from where he had been listening quietly. "I would like to learn from you," he said to Jake. "Not how to fight, but how to think clearly when afraid. My people are explorers, and we sometimes encounter situations where panic could be dangerous." "I would like to learn too," Pipla added. "My species values cooperation above all else, but perhaps we could also benefit from understanding individual courage." Other students began voicing similar requests. Jake realized that instead of making him an outcast, the incident had somehow made him a bridge between different ways of thinking. This could be the beginning of a new kind of education, the dean mused, combining the academic excellence of our traditional methods with the practical wisdom that comes from surviving on dangerous worlds. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with leftover adrenaline. For the first time since arriving at the university, he felt like he truly belonged here. Not despite being human, but because of it. "Would you be willing to help develop such a program?" the dean asked. Jake looked around at his alien classmates, these brilliant beings who had welcomed him despite their fear of his species. He thought about everything he could learn from them, and everything he might be able to teach them in return. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that very much." As the students filed out of the damaged lecture hall, Jake noticed that they were walking differently around him, not with fear or suspicion, but with respect and curiosity. Pipla asked him questions about human emergency training. Thorgan wanted to know about something called situational awareness. Even students he had never spoken to before approached him with genuine interest. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Prime University, Jake felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 months after the incident with the Corvin stalker, Jake's life at Kepler Prime University had changed in ways he never could have imagined. Instead of sitting alone in the back of classrooms, he now found himself at the center of discussions that brought together students from dozens of different worlds. The morning began like many others recently, with Jake teaching a small group of students in one of the university's practice rooms. Today's lesson was about something humans called situational awareness, which his alien friends found both fascinating and difficult to understand. "Remember," Jake said to the group of 8 students gathered around him, "you're not looking for specific threats. You're just paying attention to your environment and noticing when something changes." Pipla raised 2 of her 6 arms. "But how do you know which changes are important?" she asked. "There are so many things happening around us all the time." "That's something humans learn through practice," Jake explained. "We start by noticing obvious things, like when someone enters or leaves a room, or when the lighting changes. Then we gradually learn to notice more subtle things." Thorgan nodded his massive stone-like head. "I have been practicing this for weeks," he said in his quiet voice. "Yesterday, I noticed that the elevator in my dormitory was making a different sound. When I reported it to maintenance, they found a worn bearing that could have caused a failure." "That's exactly right," Jake said with a smile. "You prevented a problem before it became dangerous." Zixara's crystal body pulsed with soft blue light. "My people have excellent vision," she said, "but we were taught to focus on beauty and harmony. Learning to notice potential problems feels strange but also useful." The practice session was interrupted by Professor Veltar, who entered the room with her usual graceful movement. "Jake," she said, "Dean Carrick's would like to see you in his office. He has some visitors who are very interested in meeting you." Jake followed the professor through the university's corridors, past the familiar sights of alien students from hundreds of different worlds. As they walked, he reflected on how much his perspective had changed. 3 months ago, he had felt like an outsider trying to fit in. Now he felt like a valuable member of a community that was growing stronger because of its diversity. Dean Carrick's office was larger than some classrooms, with windows that looked out over the university's central plaza. Today, the office held several beings that Jake didn't recognize, along with some he did. Captain Lisa Chun from Earth's diplomatic corps was there, along with representatives from several major galactic civilizations. "Jake," the dean said, "I'd like you to meet the members of the Galactic Exploration Committee. They've been following the reports of your new educational programs with great interest." A tall, elegant being with silver skin and large eyes stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Reltani of the Astral Confederation," she said. "We have heard remarkable things about the changes happening at this university." "Changes?" Jake asked, looking confused. Captain Chun smiled. "Jake, you've become something of a celebrity in diplomatic circles. The program you've helped develop here is being studied by educators across the galaxy." "I don't understand," Jake said. "All I did was share some basic human knowledge with my classmates." "You did much more than that," said another visitor, a being whose species Jake didn't recognize. "You demonstrated that cooperation between species with different evolutionary backgrounds can create entirely new approaches to problem solving." Dean Carrick's activated a holographic display that showed statistics and charts. "Since the new curriculum began," he explained, "student performance has improved in unexpected ways. Not just in crisis management, but in creative thinking, scientific research, and even artistic expression." The display showed before and after comparisons. Students who had learned basic survival awareness were now noticing details in their research that they had missed before. Art students were creating works with new emotional depth after learning about concepts like courage and sacrifice. Even mathematics students were finding novel solutions by thinking about problems from multiple perspectives. "How is that possible?" Jake asked. Professor Veltar stepped forward. "It appears that learning to think like a survival-oriented species doesn't just teach emergency skills," she said. "It teaches a different way of processing information. Students who learn to look for potential threats also become better at spotting opportunities and making connections between ideas." Ambassador Reltani nodded. "The Astral Confederation would like to implement similar programs in our educational systems. We believe this could be the key to preparing our young people for the challenges of deep space exploration." "Other governments are expressing similar interest," Captain Chun added. "The potential applications go far beyond education. Emergency response teams, scientific expeditions, even diplomatic missions could benefit from this kind of cross-species training." Jake sat down in one of the office chairs, feeling overwhelmed. "All I wanted to do was help my classmates understand why I acted the way I did during the stalker incident. And in doing so," the dean said gently, "you opened a door to new ways of thinking that we didn't even know existed." The conversation continued for another hour, with the visitors asking Jake questions about human psychology, education methods, and cultural practices. They wanted to understand not just what humans did differently, but why they thought differently. After the meeting ended and the visitors had left, Jake walked back across the university campus with Captain Chun. The plaza was full of students from dozens of worlds, studying together, playing games, and sharing ideas in ways that would have been impossible just a few years ago. "How do you feel about all this attention?" Captain Chun asked. "Honestly, it's a little scary," Jake admitted. "I keep worrying that people are expecting too much from humans. We're not perfect. We make mistakes just like everyone else." "That's exactly the right attitude," the captain said. "The moment humans start thinking they're superior to other species is the moment this whole experiment fails." They stopped at a bench overlooking the central fountain, where Jake often sat to think. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "Of course." "When Earth first made contact with galactic civilization, did anyone expect something like this to happen?" Captain Chun was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, most people expected humans to be seen as primitive barbarians from a dangerous world," she said. "The fact that other species want to learn from us instead of just tolerating us is beyond what anyone hoped." It doesn't feel like they're learning from humans specifically, Jake said. It feels like they're learning from the idea of thinking differently. That might be the most important insight of all, the captain replied. That evening, Jake returned to his dormitory to find Pipla, Thorgan, and Zixara waiting for him in the common room. They had become his closest friends over the past months, and they had a tradition of meeting to discuss their classes and share stories from their different worlds. We heard about your meeting with the galactic representatives, Pipla said, her antennae twitching with excitement. Are you going to become some kind of interspecies ambassador? I hope not, Jake said, settling into his favorite chair. I just want to be a student and learn as much as I can. But you are learning, Thorgan pointed out. And you're teaching too. That's what good students do. Zixara's lights pulsed with warm yellow patterns. I have been thinking about something. You said in class last week, she said. You told us that humans believe challenges make people stronger. My people have always tried to avoid challenges, but now I wonder if we've been missing something important. Every species has something to offer, Jake said. Humans aren't better than anyone else. We just have different experiences. That's what makes this so exciting, Pipla said. For the first time in galactic history, we're not just studying other species from a distance. We're actually learning to think like each other. Jake looked at his friends, these incredible beings from worlds he had only dreamed of visiting. 6 months ago, he had been worried that humans would never truly fit into galactic society. Now he was beginning to understand that fitting in had never been the goal. The goal was to add something new to the mix, something that made everyone stronger. I got a message from my family on Earth today, Jake said. My little sister wants to apply to study here next year. She says she wants to learn about alien cultures the way I learned about alien thinking. That would be wonderful, Thorgan said. The more humans we have here, the more we can all learn from each other. And the more humans can learn from us, Zixara added. Her lights dancing with happiness. Jake smiled, thinking about his sister and all the other young humans who might someday walk these halls. They would face their own challenges and discover their own ways to contribute to the growing galactic community. But they would do it together, humans and aliens learning from each other, making each other stronger and wiser with every passing day. The future looked brighter than ever, not because humans were special, but because diversity itself was special. And in that diversity, everyone had something valuable to contribute.